The purpose of this video is to go over one of the models for the recommendation report, offering some suggestions for considerations that your team should make as you proceed. This model is also posted on Blackboard, and you can look at it in more detail there. So the model I have chosen here is the New Pet Education Public Outreach. It was a report completed last summer, and I thought it was a really good example of the ways that a team was able to come together to produce a very effective report that had real action. Here you see a title page. You're not required to have a title page, but if you think that it looks more professional or works for what your team is trying to do, I encourage you to include one. The first section you see here is the abstract. This is a section you should actually write at the very end of your report. And it is much like the project summary for the proposal, it is meant to give an overview of the entire contents of your document. One of the modules later will cover abstracts, so just keep in mind that you will be required to have an abstract, but not to really worry about it at the start of your project. This is because your abstract is going to, since it has to reflect what the report contains, it would change if you tried to write it first, and it would end up sounding more like an introduction rather than an abstract of the entire report. So first, starting with the introduction, what they do here is they do what's called the inverted triangle structure, and they start fairly general by giving some facts about rehomed pets. So according to the source, 10% of pets adopted from a shelter are rehomed after 6 months. This is where their starting point is. They start by giving some information and background and context to contextualize the problem that they're examining, which is the problem of rehomed pets. So in your own introduction, you want to start there. And you notice here that it has more than one paragraph. They're breaking up the content into a couple of different paragraphs. The idea of an introduction in a technical setting is to grab the reader, give context, offer background, and also provide what's called a literature review. The literature review essentially summarizes the main conversations that are happening around the topic. So here you see a lot of citations, you see a lot of data, and you see a lot of facts going on. The inverted triangle structure means that you start general, you give the context and background by offering the literature review, and then at the very end of the proposal, of the recommendation report, you see the purpose of what they're trying to do. So these two programs can serve as models for how we can improve pet retention locally. So you see that they move from that general to the more specific, and they state what they are trying to focus on, which is college students as pet owners and making sure to educate them to prevent rehoming of pets. The second section after that introduction is the methods section. Here the methods outlines precisely how the group obtained the information that they had. And you see here it's a very brief section. It doesn't need to be extended or overly long. All it needs to do is give the methods of how you collected data. In an experimental setting where you're doing a really complex methodology, a method section might be longer. Here you're just saying, hey, I collected primary information using surveys, for instance. This section is usually in the past tense because it reflects on what you did in the past. And it's also usually in passive voice. So you want to avoid the we collected data, instead saying something like primary data was gathered by interviewing through a survey, and so on and so forth. If you're using a survey or an interview, I would recommend that you include the questions in an appendix. Don't include them in the methodology, just refer to them as, say, see Appendix A, for instance, if you want to include the section there or the questions there. In the methods section, you don't want to get into the results of your survey yet. Just essentially say how you got the information. The next section is a little tricky. So you can either have a results section isolated, or you can have a results and discussion section that are a unified section. The choice you want to make here is if you have a lot of data or a lot of results that you want to discuss more thoroughly, include your results separately. And there you can essentially go through what you found through your methodology. However, if it's really difficult for you to separate the discussion, the argument that you want to make from the results that you found, include these two sections together. This team decided to include the sections as one, partly because they felt that it was too challenging to separate them into two separate sections. The results and the discussion are the heart of your recommendation report. They're where you share the what you found and why it matters. So the results focuses on what you found, the discussion focuses on why it matters. And in the discussion, if you have it separate, you would be talking about your results, but also bringing in your secondary information to bolster those what you found in the primary research. So results would focus solely on what you found as primary research. Discussion would focus on why it matters in the context of the other research that you've gathered, the other secondary research. Here, since it's one section, you'll see the argument happening in that way. So what is important about this section is to focus on the results and explaining essentially using it as an opportunity to advance an argument. And as you read through here, you'll see that they're doing that. They're also including visualizations. We'll talk a little bit more about visualizations later, but do keep in mind that you are collecting information and you want to start thinking about how you can represent it visually. And there are rules about how you refer to figures and graphs. One is that you label it something specific. I would say that this one needs to be a little bit more this title needs to be a little bit more detailed. So animal behavior doesn't really represent. Essentially, it's the graph actually shows why the animal was surrendered, for instance, or was returned to the shelter. So that figure caption is a little inaccurate. So that's the first rule. The second rule is that you refer to it directly in the text. So if you see up here, it says something to the effect of figure 1 indicates that one of the top reasons for pet surrender is under da-da-da, so on. So keep that in mind as you proceed. You see that they also have a second figure. Again, it's not very descriptive as a title. It's the figure is showing life events that led to someone deciding to rehome their pet, but that figure caption is not, you can't tell that unless you read the text. So you want those figure captions to stand alone. This is something that's really challenging for a lot of students, and I'm going to have a separate video and module that I'll discuss how to deal with figures in the future module. And you can see here again, they're going through their results, and they're also bringing in other material to help discuss it. And they're talking really heavily about why this data matters. So you see there's a sense of an argument. So after you go through your results and your discussion, you come to your recommendations. And this is where you say, based on your information, here is what you recommend as a course of action. So your proposal proposed to examine a problem and offered some potential ways to examine it. Here is where you say, here's what we think you should do. So they're recommending a campaign to educate the local population on pet ownership and what resources are available to help them retain the pets that they have adopted from a shelter. So, and then they start going through the details of what that would look like. Here is where you get very detailed about what you think your program or the action that you want to take would look like, and how to go about implementing it. You can include visuals here, or tables, or bullets, or all kinds of different formatting options. And you might also bring in other programs, for instance, that you want to cite as being models for what you want to set up. So lots of specificity and detail here, and it should give us a sense of what the program would look like and how to implement it. This will make your recommendation report also more feasible. So here you see that they have sort of a two-phase process. One is a sort of immediate event where they have a booth on campus and they pass out pamphlets, and they actually created a pamphlet for their presentation. And you're able to go through, or they went through like what that event would look like, what it would encourage the students to do, and so on. And then they also offer a long-term vision. So, you know, they have an immediate short-term goal, but then they think, well, we could also extend this to other universities or colleges in the Treasure Valley area to build on these educational efforts, and focusing very much on college students. in the area. And then they offer their conclusion, which just allows them to reaffirm what they've already stated, get at that idea of the so what. Why does this information matter? Why is this problem something that needs to be solved? And why does the solution work? So you see here, there's a return to some of the sources they used and some statistics. And it also really hits home here at the very end with our plan to spread awareness about the resources available to local pet owners. We hope to support them and their pets so they can coexist peacefully. So in the end, it's making sure that pets are able to stay with the person who adopted them. So this is just a sense of one of the recommendation report models. There are two. There's a couple of different ways you can approach this recommendation report for your team. So you want to keep in mind that these main sections have specific jobs, but you can also adapt them and move them around, or not move them around, but really think about what needs to go into them based on your team's purpose and what you want to accomplish with this recommendation report. Make sure you, of course, have your references here at the end and any appendices that you want to include. And think again about how this formatting can really help you show yourself as a professional. So I hope this video was beneficial and helpful in helping you understand what the recommendation report should do. And I encourage you to reach out and talk to me and work with me as you build your recommendation report as a team.